hi, this is Anjan here speaking. I'm part of the DLC Global HR Committee for the Hong Kong chapter. I'm an executive coach, graduated from the Newfield Network Inc. And I'm currently working as executive director, talent and organization development for the Reinsurance Group of America, looking after the organization development work for the Asia Pacific region. I have pretty much around 2 decades of human capital experience. I worked for firms which are CPG, manufacturing, and now in services. In my 2 decades, I've worked in different life cycles of firm, which typically be M&As, scaling up operations, diversifying into other categories. And one of the interesting part about my job is the ability to work with different cultures. So I was fortunate to be a part of a team which had predominant presence in EMEA. I worked in India for a while, and now in Asia Pacific. So except for North America, I pretty much worked at this part of the world. My area of interest being, I'm also a PhD on organization theory and design. I do a lot of work around organization theory and how does it impact firms, with themes around innovation, startups. So these are some of the areas that I'm currently busy with in my personal capacity. So that's in just about myself, Sukhendra.
Hi, I'm Sukhendra. I'm a DLC Global HR Committee Hyderabad chapter member. I'm founder and CEO of Chizuba, a corporate virtual volunteering platform. So when I went to IIT, I founded the ISEC chapter. This was about 12, 13 years ago. ISEC enables students to volunteer abroad. So we were a 52-member team, facilitated hundreds of students to volunteer abroad from India to abroad, and brought a lot of students from abroad to India. Then work took me to Russia. I worked for a travel tech startup there. Then I moved to Taiwan. I was working for a gaming company. And then I worked for a US-based HR tech startup. And then in 2017, finally, I decided to jump into entrepreneurship myself and started this virtual volunteering platform, which enables skilled professionals to volunteer from any part of the world. So we started off as a platform, as a marketplace between nonprofit organizations and individuals who can use their skills to volunteer virtually, to eventually becoming an enterprise SaaS platform which is used by large corporations, the likes of Tata Group, Asian Paints, ServiceNow, etc. These companies, they use this platform to engage their employees through virtual volunteering. So yeah, that's the brief background about us. We're a small company, about 20, 30 people, mostly based in India. We have our headquarters in the US though. And I'm excited to be here, have this fireside chat with Anjan, and share ideas and learn from each other. Yeah. So Anjan, I think just to kickstart, I mean, one of the things that we hear a lot these days is the great resignation. A lot of people quitting jobs, and kind of sounds a little weird because with the economy going down, you would think like people like to protect their jobs more. But in spite of that, even during COVID, we've seen a lot of people quit jobs, particularly in the tech industry, but pretty much universally. So as leaders, as HR leaders, more specifically, what could be any kind of tangible actions or any key insights that you think as leaders we could share with the rest of the DLC members as to how we can kind of attract top talent, but most importantly also retain this high performing top talent and develop a very diverse and an inclusive workforce.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sukhendra. Great to be with you on this chat. So, and thank you for what you just shared about yourself. This is so interesting that I hear this from you. Yeah, I think you posit a very interesting dilemma that we are facing at a talent space, because typically the premise was that during these times, there would be a lot of hot talent who would leverage the existing firms, because a lot of firms are in a situation that they will maintain status quo, not expand operations, try to see and weather the storm and move into the next decade of operation and challenges. And in this domain, the assumption was that talent would be static. What you just said was it was just the opposite, and we saw that, correct? So one of the insights that we've garnered while studying data about, in particular, high performing talent is that a lot of high performing talent has used these opportunities to venture out in different forms of operation. So for example, they've been exploring opportunities which are more entrepreneurial. So they would possibly like to lay their hands on roles. And we are not saying start your own company. Entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean you have to start your own company. It's also trying to look at and experiment roles which provides opportunities where they learn and have the freedom to operate with a certain amount of flexibility. That had caused a lot of people to kind of look through, what am I doing today? Is this value creating for me on the jobs? Can I do this from X place versus Y place? Therefore, does this company adaptive or flexible enough to give me that opportunity? And you will be surprised that classical firms, especially in Asia Pacific, 60% of the firms, and this is just manufacturing representation data, are still struggling to adopt policies around flexi working. Whilst there's a lot of talk around it, it's at the operational level. Hybrid and flexi working is an experimental system or an intervention that people are still toying with, right? In this time, we see a lot of high performing talent moving to firms where you have these levels of flexibility or fungibility. That's one insight that we've got. And therefore, to come to your next part is, what is it that we organizations should do? I think one of the things that I follow when you're looking at firms, at least in Hong Kong or this part of the region, you don't have to get flexi working or hybrid working 100% correct. I think they should take the risk in just putting an enabling environment of entrepreneurship or roles those are more free to operate with higher levels of accountabilities down below to be able to start retaining talent. I'm not sure whether that'll directly address the issue, but I think to an extent it'll cover the fact that you're deliberate in providing that environment, that enabling environment that a lot of talent or high performing talents are looking for. And you might be wrong. I mean, tomorrow you might come back and say, you know what, we got it 70% correct. We goofed up the 30%. It's fine. You learn on the way, but just do it. Don't wait for the best system and the best CRMs and the best policies to cover. And the next one is pay. And I think a lot of organizations have done pay cuts. They have known of big firms looking at bonuses and variable pay. And to, at the stake of being a little more provocative, we tend to be very reticent about talking about pay. Pay is not the driver for attrition. Well, it is to an extent. Let's face it sometimes, right? So you might want to, now that things are slowing down, COVID is slowly getting controllable, you might look at where you are on the pay and see whether that's attractive enough. So I'm going to take the liberty to broach something which is stereotypical or been thought as stereotypical before, and see whether you are paying the right talent, the right amount, or the right benefits to be able to see whether you can retain. So these would be two big rocks that I would think about.
No, I think I must agree with particularly the entrepreneurial part. Being an entrepreneur myself, right, and hiring mostly young talent, you see a lot of young people questioning about how they are able to create social impact. And more importantly, how they are able to create impact for the company even that they are working, like whatever that they are doing on a day-to-day basis, does that make any difference? And that's a question I think people have been able to ask more so in the pandemic. That did change a lot. When you have a lot more time for yourself, social media is, people spend a lot more time on social media. It's all glamorous about entrepreneurship and so on, right? So everyone's kind of thinking like, okay, how do I take part in that way? How do I do something which gives me like that 10x kind of a learning, but at the same time, everything that I'm doing makes sense. So companies which have traditionally been, these well-oiled machines, where it's not making much of a difference whether this one person, whether he stays, leaves, whatever they do, does not make much of a difference. I think that's employees are becoming increasingly more conscious and aware about what value they are adding, and it's important to them. That's something that I've personally observed as well. All the people that we have hired in the last few years, wherever they are coming from, one of the most common things we've heard from them is to, what's the reason for the switch? One of the most common answers we've heard is that, I want to do something which makes sense, like where I find my purpose. I think increasingly young people are striving towards that. Now, I've also noticed this when I ask myself this question, right? Why is it that people care about what they're doing so much more now compared to, let's say, a few decades ago? I think it has to do with the historical context here. When you're talking, 1920s, 30s, pre-independence in India or the Great Depression in the US, right, when economy was, all or the world wars that were happening. Survival was very, very important. So people crave for stability, something that will give them clear answers and their future is safe. So you look at most of the companies then, I think the attrition was like negligible. The median tenure in these companies was significantly higher. And it has a lot to do with how people were at that point in time, like less to do with what companies were doing right versus what they're doing wrong now. In fact, I think the other way around. I think a lot more companies are
Yeah.
doing a lot of things right these days. In spite of that, you see these attritions shooting up like anything, median tenures going down. So I think it's like we've evolved as a society from caring more about stability, putting food on the table, to then providing. That's like more our grandfather's generation. Our father's generation would be more like providing better lives to our kids. Kind of okay, what job pays me more? So I'm kind of going there. And then we've come to our generation where people are asking these very critical questions. Teenagers are talking about environment, right? Like our high schools are talking about startups and entrepreneurship, right? So it's clear that the younger generations are more focused on what the purpose of the life is, the Maslow's hierarchy, right? They're reaching to that stage where they are able to make pose these tough questions which the previous generations didn't. And I am noticing key trends in even traditional companies addressing this challenge that they have never faced in the past, right? Like, oh, what, we are doing everything right, we're providing insurances for all our employees. We're providing work from home benefits, yet people leave like in a year. What's happening, right? So I think that's a very tough challenge that most companies are trying to circumvent around. And yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone has answers to it, but like you rightly mentioned, we can't be too slow in decision making. We can't wait for perfection. You have to take those risks and say like, okay, I could be only 70% correct, but I might just do this now, learn on the go, and then make it better. I mean, far more than far more times I've noticed, at least with my small team, that we did so many things wrong, but the team's usually very forgiving, right? You kind of display your intent in acting in that right direction. That probably suits this generation a lot more. That okay, they're trying rather than you might be doing a lot of things on the back end, setting up all the processes and like okay, we are ready to launch in 2 years down the line. No one has, unfortunately, the patience to wait for those 2 years, nor if you're not able to show them the intent that you want to work in that direction. I think that's something that probably some big companies are losing out on. You've got to tell them more what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do, and that we are in together. That's the language that needs to be used more often, in my opinion, even with big traditional companies, no matter how many thousands of employees you have. That's just my a couple of cents on that. One of the key things that we also talk about in this process is the diversity bit, right? As I was mentioning, as a young company, it's easy to get carried away and say that let's hire young people because they got to be tech savvy, they got to be fast, agile, purpose driven. But in the process, when we don't hire diverse enough people, whether that's gender, whether that's age, you play a game where you'll never know that you're going wrong, right? You do not understand the other perspective. So talking about diversity in companies, how critical do you think that is, no matter the size of the company? Why do you think we should start investing in diversity if we have not already done that in the past?
Yeah, great point, Sukhendra. I think it is very critical. There is no discussion around, and there is a business case. There's a lot of research out there where it says it's got a direct correlation to performance. There's direct correlation to engagement, which leads to higher performance. So there's a lot of research which at least the causality is established with diverse talent and has high productivity and performance. And to your point, I think one of the things that the investment of diversity should be going beyond the gender and the age, right? Because I think one of the things that for the last 7 to 8 years, we've overkilled the word gender.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not saying that we should not look at gender. I think we need to add more dimensions of diversity in our corporate fabric, okay, and not maniacally focus on gender and the age, which is critical. But I don't think so it's going to define a high-performing team or a high-performing culture purely by these two dimensions, or maybe few tangible dimensions. I think the way to look at it is, when you're looking at diversity, what are we looking in? And you talked about hiring. What's the level of thought spectrum that a person has? Is it diverse? For example, an obvious question that we posit to people is that, have you worked in different industry? And it's a great diverse question. Have you worked with different teams? Have you worked in a factory? Have you worked in a call center? Have you worked in a service sector? That's a great diverse question or an inquiry. And I think we should increasingly give more importance to such level of details. And I think that we've been asking these questions, but we've not been consciously aware that these are diversity questions. And these are questions that really define high-performing teams.
Mm-hmm.
And I would possibly encourage firms to, get your gender proportion. You'll fix it. I mean, if you're if you're a male-female ratio of 80-20, in the next 5 years, you'll get into 50 or 50. It's a call, right? It's a decision point that your chairman or your CEO or your CHRO will take. Okay, from tomorrow, we gun for 50-50, right? That's the easiest thing to do. But what's not easy to do is to be able to look at what's the corporate exposure what's the width of exposure or the diverse experience that you come to put on the table. We should also be mindful about such elements of diversity questions or inquiry with the existing employees. Who are we promoting? Is that promotion decision purely based on gender, or is it because of exposure that he or she is bringing? Especially when you work in a multinational, are we bringing in different nationalities to coincide and converge into generating high value? That's a diverse part. And I think it's extremely important. And I also feel that it was always there. I also feel that it was not very much weighted. And I think we should give now its due weightage and have arrived at these decisions. So I think it's to answer your question, it is important. We should not only invest in terms of time and money, but you should also invest on creating awareness around these to our recruiting managers and our existing employees to kind of look at these dimensions.
True. In fact, what I like to believe is if you think about where companies play a role, if you talk about funnel, schools and universities are like where the beginning of the funnel happens, and companies come somewhere midway. So, as you rightly pointed out, right, like maybe a decade ago, it would be 80-20 male-female ratio, and regardless of whether you try or not, it is changing.
Yeah.
That's simply because there are more women joining the workforce, because more women are getting educated, and so on, right? So that's something really resonates with my personal experience. As a first-time entrepreneur, when we just started, I remember we framed the HR policy. Maybe three founders, from two different races, two different gender, two different nationalities. So, when we were framing this HR policy, we were looking at so many aspects, including diversity. So we were like, we had this policy, which is like, at no point in time in our company, we would have more than 2/3 of any gender. And we thought like that was a decent buffer. We're not taking 50-50, when you're small, the sample size is too small. You'll always have that, up and down. So I thought like, okay, 2/3 is a decent is a decent buffer. And what we learned over a period of time is it's not just about bringing diversity into the team overall, but at every level. I think that was a lot more important as well. So we also have this policy reader that, okay, we need to have 2/3 at every level, including the leadership. So what started with gender, eventually we started expanding on it because that was obvious, right? Gender is something that you think of diversity, the first thing that comes into your mind is gender. And then when we started hiring, initially we started hiring too much for experience. And then we learned that, we thought like because we are young, having experienced people that we complementary skill sets. And then we learned that we were going too much into one direction, just blindly following one direction of experience. Then we hired young people, and then it was far too chaotic because nobody came with experience, everybody came with a lot of ideas, right? So what we learned is it was really important to maintain the balance, again, within teams, not just having, let's say, 10 really experienced folks in operations and all engineering teams like really young people. Like every department needs to have like that experienced folks and young folks so that they can complement each other with their skill sets. And like you rightly mentioned as well, we started talking about industries. People, it's obvious like you want to hire whatever industry that you are in, right? You want to hire people from same industry because you think like, oh, that will save the time of them learning about it and they'll bring past experiences and exposures into it. But what we have particularly observed in our short tenure also is it didn't matter if people, in fact, it mattered positively that people come from different industries because they could come with different learnings and even functions. We saw a lot of people switch from one department to another completely, to someone from customer service to product, and providing the opportunity to them really helped because when the customer service person switched from customer service to product, the product team was injected with fresh ideas that they were probably not aware of before. So I'm a very much fan of what you said, which is diversity comes naturally. The only thing you got to be sure about is just be aware of it. Like be aware of your biases, and once you start acknowledging that this is a bias and you want to avoid it, it's like going to the gym, right? You just exercise. It's like, okay, every time I'm thinking, making a decision, just cross questioning myself: is there a bias involved in it? And is there a good bias, bad bias? Do I want to stick to it or do I want to change my decision on that? So that's something that we've observed over a period of time. The moment we are unbiased with our decisions, at least not biased based on race, gender, region, etc., we started seeing better results on diversity spectra in spite of not aiming for it. So we didn't have to go into an interview and hire someone because they were diverse, right? We just hired the best fit for that role. All we had to do is remove our own biases, right?
Yeah.
Thinking like, okay, young are better than old, or men are better than women, etc., etc. You kind of, once you take away those biases which have been fed to you from the society, you realize that you are hiring what is more of a natural proportion of how the world talent is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very relevant. Might I add that, there's certain of, one of the things that we always miss with organizations is one is your type of leadership, where for you diversity happens naturally, but in some places we don't have that luxury of leadership where it does not happen naturally. Because think about an oil and gas company in India. I'm not naming somebody, but who's been there for 150 years and has operated out with the same level of standards to forget hire, even manage talent within the company. So for them, I think in addition to the biases, we also need to be a little more deliberate about taking those steps. And therefore, I think stuff around putting it in policy, making it a mandate, there's nothing wrong to put a mandate. And I'm completely for it, because that is where you will remove those biases gradually. Because people who've done it conditioned for 50 years will not change tomorrow. So therefore, I think it's important that for those companies who've been brought and who's been ingrained into a system of conditioning where the biases are so strong, you need to put in something strong, which might displease a few people, or this might just ruffle feathers. But if you want to drive that level of diversity or vibrancy within the company to drive results, you need to take those hard calls. And I think a lot of us don't do that. And so I think that's in addition to the biases, you need to be a little more deliberate. And these are for classical firms, not new generation firms that we're talking about.
Probably why, the new generation firms, I think they're more starting at zero. They do not know what is the negative, right? Like, whereas the classical firms have been learning something for decades now. And that's why I say they got to be a lot more conscious. They got to unlearn what they've learned in the past
Yeah.
and then remove those biases and take it forward. For which, like you rightly mentioned, when you're talking company in certain industries or with few tens of thousands of employees, the change needs to come from the top. That either through compliances, through legalities, rules, however, whatever works the best for the organization. But I think if it starts changing from the top, you'll see it trickle down very fast. That's so. I think it's at the leadership level, and that brings me down to the next point as well. Like, as leaders, how do we create a workplace? And this is more about HR leaders, leaders in general, because you have significant influence on how the culture in the workplace is like, right? So what kind of things would you do? How do you create an environment or a workplace where no matter who the employee is, whether it's a fresher, whether it's like a really senior person, whether it's again a man or a woman, whether it's a customer support person or a CTO, what kind of an environment would you create? And I'm aware it's not going to be a one size fits all, but what exactly are those actions that you have experienced in the past that work for you, at least in your firm, where you feel like this is an environment where every employee can thrive in?
Yeah, so I'm going to attempt and providing you some of the very specific things that one can do to enhance that level of inclusion, if that's the question. And it cuts across my 2 decades of work that I've done with firms, not restricted to the firm that I'm currently in. But I think, one of the things that we must attack, and that's the area of my further study in my that I'm currently doing, is around how do you build organizations to foster inclusion? You need to first look at your organization structure and see whether that structure enhances, apart from the many parameters, being productivity, efficiency, costs, etc., the aspect of inclusion. So please try to feature inclusion as a discussion on organization structures every year when you sit with the structure. That's a tangible. But I fail to understand how many organizations have agile structures, formal agile structures. Very few. So one of the very specific things that you can do is identify tasks or projects or jobs or cohorts of jobs which fosters agile work, and then build organization structures to cater to that. What it will do is it'll provide people from different functions and different interdisciplinary areas to come and work together. Could be from a different location or etc. Do that job, disband the job, deliver, and go back to wherever they are. That's a great example of how do you build inclusion within organizations. Way you can very easily do is to be more deliberate around what are some of your management processes and how is the configuration looking at. So for example, if you're looking at a succession plan for your top 10 leadership positions, be very deliberate around that you want to put a 50-50 in your leadership team so that your inclusion, and I'm saying not gender, I'm saying anywhere. It could be a Vietnamese, or it could be an Indian, or it could be somebody, a Malawi. That's inclusion. So try to ensure that you have your organization structures, levels which are below that succession decision, have healthy mixes of different nationalities or thoughts or ideas and so on and so on. That's another tangible. It'll take some time because you finally find, you know what, at this level, we are 80% this nationality or this type of experience and 20% that type of experience. So there's work to be done below. So your succession plans will obviously get impacted higher up if you don't fix the foundation, right? So I think we need to break as HR some of the myths and not look at the activity, but what is it that he or she is bringing to the table in terms of skills to be able to foster?
One of the things that I always think of when you're talking about diverse team in years of experience as well, right? Or the positions that they hold in the company. Usually, people who just join the company, they're not as connected to the company or the cause, or that's what you'd like to think. Like, oh, they probably don't know much. They're not as connected. So as leaders, what we do in our company, at least what we tend to do a lot, is we have this concept of reactive versus proactive work in the company. So of course, I mean, depending on which position you are, uh, as you keep going higher the ladder or the corporate ladder, as it's put, you are spending a lot more time on the proactive part. So the reactive parts are stuff that you just do, right? If you are into sales, you're calling, or if you're customer service, you're responding to emails and stuff like that. It's just a part of your GD when you were hired. And then proactive work is something which nobody tells you what to do. It's more about you are thinking, what skill do I want to improve? How else do I want to contribute to my role or to my organization? And as you keep growing higher as a CEO, we tend to have a lot of my work on a day-to-day basis is proactive because reactive work is handled by mostly specific departments. So I'm always thinking, okay, how do I take this forward? How do I add value to my team? How do I improve each of the team members' careers? And what we've noticed is when we provide a space of proactive work for no matter which employee or which position or which department they are, they come back to us with several ideas, which are a win-win scenario, which is more like, hey, I am interested in learning more about social media. And I've also noticed that the company's social media is terribly handled. No one's taking care of that. Can I just take it up? In the process, I learn as well as the companies moving forward. Now, this is relatively easier to do, of course, in smaller companies versus large companies, but it doesn't have to be like the exact example that I said, right? There could be a lot of avenues where the employee is thinking proactively, whether it's just 5% of the total work or 1% or 70%, but they are thinking, how do I go up? How do I contribute more? And how will that help the organization? I think that giving them that space to think has resulted in them finding that subconscious connect with the company, right? They're trying to align their goals with the company's goals. And there is an immense amount of accountability and ownership that's created, even with freshers who just joined the company. So that's one you know best case practice that we tried and worked quite fine for us. And in this process, I think it's created a kind of an environment where everyone feels like they are a part of it and everyone feels like they are contributing and in the process, which means that they can thrive in this environment. They're learning a lot, contributing a lot, which is probably what majority of the employees really want. So those are, I think, a couple of examples that I could think of when I think about this issue of how to improve workforce productivity in a more inclusive environment.
In fact, I learned a lot when I was hearing from you. And as you were talking, one of the things that really occurred to me is, when we're looking at making an attempt to do an inclusive workforce, a lot of it is also depending on the individual. So there's that much that an organization can do.
So I do believe that it's not one's responsibility. You can't do it without employees' interest, and employees, no matter how interested they are, they can't do it if the organization is not providing them that platform. But anyway, since we are talking about these you know people switching roles and all, you tend to think about if talent acquisition seems to be on top of mind for HR all the time. You talk about recruitment drives and even diversity at the time of hiring, all these things, right? It looks as if HR function is about bringing people to the company for like just like sales is like you have to bring customers. But unfortunately, in the business world, very little is talked about retention, right? Which I think is uh, in layman's words, a dollar saved is a dollar earned, right? An employee who hasn't left is as good as a new employee that you've hired. So unfortunately, very little is spoken about talent retention. But do you want to share any past experiences, best case practices when it comes to implementing a retention strategy? Or do you at all think there a strategy to how to retain employees?
So I worked for a chocolate company as a CHRO for India and EMEA in my previous assignment. And the MD, who apparently came in new, because one of the mandates that were given to me was to turn around the India business, apart from the executive team, was to be able to develop a retention strategy for high performing talent, right? And it took me about a month to understand that statement, because I might sound like a little provocative, but I don't think so. There can be any retention strategy for any company. I don't believe in a retention strategy, and that's personal. I feel that if you want to really retain talent, it has to be longitudinal and not focused on retention, because retention is an outcome of a lot of things that you do. And by definition, what management books have taught us is strategy is long term, and it's the choices that you make. It's all about choices that you make. So I don't think so. My point of view, Sukhendra, would be that we should move away from this classical thinking of devising retention strategy. We should be more spending time on defining the macros of what makes somebody stay in a company. And that could be different from your company and my company. You can put a standard 5 things that makes people stay but very contextually in a startup like in an entrepreneurial setup, working with every day for the last 5 years, what are the top 3 things that makes your top 5 people stay? It could be pay, it could be the drive, it could be the project, it could be the virtual locations. I think we should just simply define these 3 and see where we are on these 3 for all employees. You might do an incremental more for your high performance, which is fine. You pay a $1 more, or you give them a better color tie, etc., or a designation. That's fine. For me, I think we should move away from the mindset of retention strategy and figure out what does my company, because I think a retention strategy is a very defensive way to look at it. People are leaving and I want to devise a retention strategy, rather than what is it that people are that's saying, what is making people stay in my company, and how effectively are we doing that? And for me, if it could be compensation because we are the top percentile of the market, or is it the brand that I belong to? And I think we should focus not only HR, but I think we should think around that. And then that's one. The second thing that I would love people to think around is, do we need to retain everybody? I mean, it's fine by design that 20% of my people will churn or 30% of my people will churn. And again, it's a bias that I'm operating with. But think about this. If you have 30% of your team leaving, it brings in a lot of vibrancy within the company. Obviously, when you have 30% of your top talent leaving, there's a concern. But you have an assumption that the other person coming in is not a top talent. So I think we should remove those biases and start being so maniacally worried about retention. And that's what I do as HR manager, as wherever firms I do. I tell businesses, don't get too worried about somebody leaving. Do the best you can to retain the person. Talk to them, coach them, cajole them. But don't feel bad about that person leaving, because you'll get somebody in the market who will be fundamentally good, if not better. I mean, at the end of the day, it might take a little time, but broadly at the high level. So, and the other one is, you might by design job, and I know there are some jobs, especially in banking sector, that are designed to ensure that that person doesn't stay in that role for more than 3 years. And that's not the person, it's just the role. That's the way it's designed. That you do finish the job, you can move on somewhere else, or you can quit the company and go. I'm fine with that. Just give me 3 years of your good time. We'll take care of you. I think organizations should start accepting those facts and spending too much time on retention strategy. It's a waste of time. I'm sorry to be blunt and curt, because there is no retention strategy. Today's retention strategy will change in next month because somebody has some other reasons to leave.
Yeah. I catch a lot of keywords there, which I totally resonate with. When you talk about you can't have a universal retention strategy, I totally resonate, right? There are times when techies say, no matter how much you pay, if I'm not learning a new technology, I'm leaving. There will be something like, no matter how much the pay is, I want to leave at 5 so that I can spend time with my family. Work-life balance is a lot more important to them. Diversity is a lot more important to someone. Pay is more critical to someone. Like no matter what the job is, I just want the highest pay. I want this percentage of increase every single time. So what I've noticed is each person is so different. And I know it's easy for me to say as a small company, I can talk to literally every person in the company every month and ask like, hey, has something changed from last month? Like, are you still looking for the same goals or has something changed? So it's much easier for me to do this. But when I think of even bigger companies, I think if we can break down if there is any strategy at all, in my head, that would be like you break down the entire company into small teams, and each team, like if there's a manager or there's a leader, you tend to talk to each person in the team and understand what that each person wants. If you provide every person what they want, by default, you'll tend to actually retain a lot more people. But if you have a strategy for all 100 people, uh, it doesn't fit and suit all 100 people. So I think if at all there's a strategy, that strategy should be customized to each individual and should be continuously revisited, because the individual is also not a constant. Individual keeps changing with time, with circumstances. So acknowledging those two things, right, like that it is customized to one individual and that it has to be revisited again and again. I think both those points that you mentioned are absolutely spot on. No doubt about it at all. And to some extent, I also agree that acknowledging that people will leave, kind of also creates a better culture in the entire company. Imagine one person leaving, and it's kind of creating a sense of worry for other people in the teams. Like, why is that person leaving? Is something wrong with this company, or are we all getting paid lower, or is the company sinking? Like, it creates like so many questions of these. But again, as leaders, if we can acknowledge that 20% retention, it happens, or 30% retention happens, whatever your benchmarks are, depending on the industry or depending on your own company, right? Like, this is something that we always expect, because people go, they they want to change cities, they go for higher education, they want a much bigger pay, which unfortunately we can't afford. There can be a zillion reasons why people leave, but it's normal that some people will leave. And I think the more you acknowledge and kind of create that kind of transparency and environment, that if you start looking at people quitting as a scary metric uh, from the very beginning, I think you tend to play defensive, like you rightly mentioned. So you need not be focused on that metric at all until in your head probably you put that metric at a certain level, right? Okay, I'll start thinking about it when it hits 50%, when it hits 60%. But
Yeah.
until then, uh, playing a game of how do I provide everyone with what they want, and then just look at retention or attrition as just a number to capture data, not like aiming for that number, but just a number that you're observing from the back end, whether or not the trends are changing. I think that goes a long way.
Think about this matrix. This retention or attrition is actually a negative matrix. Think about a P&L of a company or a balance sheet of a company. Do you think about any item which is negative, which you can turn it like perpetually negative? I don't think about any. It is the only matrix that is perpetually negative. It's called attrition.
Right. Yeah. So when you think about people, employees these days asking questions beyond the paycheck, okay, it's not just the money that I'm looking at, but whether it means work-life balance, whether it means what is the environmental impact of this company, or whether it means the diversity part of it. How important do you think the two parts of it, right? The measurement of it, how are we measuring what all these non-monetary factors that we're talking about, and how transparent are we about ensuring that everyone in the company knows this data? What's your take on that?
I think there is a lot of consciousness in the last few years, and you know it. You work in this space around. At least boards in different companies are inserting as part of their goals, as in the board goals, the tangible, the monetary and the non-monetary. I for sure in my company have those elements, and what it constitutes those non-monetary are equally weighted with respect to the monetary. So it's not that, non-monetary is 30% and monetary is 30%. So what I see as companies doing positively is that they are trying to insert the non-monetary elements increasingly. And this is directly coming from the boards. If you ask me what is getting added here as non-monetary, different companies have different levels and standards they would like to do. So case in point being non-monetary are the engagement results that the company have versus benchmark, ESG outcomes. So, what are your ESG goals versus benchmark, cyber security, data privacy scores, which is again, a lot of work has been happening in that area as non-monetary. So, when you're looking at accountability, the accountability is going beyond the revenue and the bottom line, but also looking at, how do you manage quality, which is again non-monetary. And of course, there are matrices measures for each of them. So engagement has a number, ESG has a number, cybersecurity, data privacy has a number. All of that is all quantitative, but non-monetary. Interestingly, the weightages is also leading to monetary. So you'll have, say, 30% of your weighted of your performance pay or your etc. or your whatever your ABP goals are, etc. being dedicated to non-monetary, which is fantastic. So I see a very positive movement in companies across sectors who are building in these elements in their ABP goals or the annual performance goals. And I think you're talking about environment, ecological, social. Absolutely. I mean, I come from a company, an Indian company. I worked with ITC, where I think it's the world's fastest. They're carbon positive. I think they're water positive. They're ecologically, all the matrices they meet. And these are matrices that they produce in their sustainability report that all of us were accountable for. So there would be, beyond the paycheck, implications on proactive wellness. How are we doing that in terms of learning and listening, right? So I think you will have added dimensions getting added there. My last point around this whole thing around paycheck is the pattern that I'm seeing is, I think there are firms that are moving from performance pay to actual profit sharing models. At the end of the year, we are rated on company performance, etc., etc. So that classical definition around performance pay is slowly moving from performance pay to profit sharing. So if the company does well, you get something. I'm not too worried about what you do individually. So the weightages of individual weightages are reducing quite a bit. So you'll find earlier it was 50-50 company and etc. The classical business models, the performance. Now it's moving into 30% personal, 30%, 20% regional, and say 50% company. Increasingly, the individual performance will reduce and company. So you will find evolving models around moving away from performance pay to profit sharing as a philosophy of paycheck, or whichever way you want to do it. So that's something that I've been noticing very, very recently.
I can also testify that, because we are in the space of measuring impact to some extent, I can testify that it's quintessential for companies, both employees and stakeholders alike, to measure. If you're talking volunteering, how did this increase the employee volunteering or employee satisfaction as a whole? If you're talking about ESG, right, how much of an impact has it created on the environment after we made this change? So that measurement becomes quintessential, because once you talk about data or numbers, you are not restricting people who understand those metrics to be a part of it. What does it mean that employee engagement or employee satisfaction increased from 63% to 88%? Maybe the HR can talk more about it, right? Okay, this could mean this could mean this. These are probably the reasons. These are the effects, and this would translate to so many. Our retention rate being this much and all that stuff. Don't mention all your actions. Give us numbers in terms of results, so that everyone can understand and everyone can get the same page. So It was a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your candid thoughts. And I see we've been having a lot of synergies in this whole process as well. So really, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Sukhendra. I think great conversation. I think I learned a lot from what you just said, especially coming from the space that you operate. I'm extremely grateful for the time that you spent and even the ideas that you threw up. Right, some of it are new and very difficult for some people who've been in organizations for long to kind of adopt, and it will take time to adopt some of the things. But I see there is positive movement in some of the areas we've discussed. It might not be immediate, but over a period of time, we will see the light of the day. And there's nothing wrong or right about anything we said. It's all about testing and trying to see whether that works.
Great. Hi, so we are a corporate volunteering platform. What that means is we use technology and our wide network of nonprofits in about 95 countries to create diverse micro volunteering and gamified volunteering opportunities for employees of your company. And then use technology to understand which employee wants to volunteer how and accordingly provide them with that particular opportunity using algorithms to map that. So in essence, our goal is to increase employee volunteering in companies worldwide, hopefully building a better world for everyone. So in case any of you are looking to implement some CSR or employee volunteering strategies in your company, you can reach out to us. We are Chezuba, www.chezuba.net, or I'm Sukhendra Rompally, available on LinkedIn as well. Thank you.
Hi, I am an executive coach with an ICC PCC certification. I've done more than 500 hours of coaching. I predominantly work in the areas of career transition, leadership, and life. So if anybody wants to seek out or reach out to me on some of the areas that you would like to work with respect to coaching, I'll be very happy to help. I'm also reaching out to the NGOs who need some help. I've done some work on differently abled children who work out of Hong Kong University and now moving into their career life. I work with refugees. So if anybody who needs help and support, you have my coordinates uh, uh, in the website, or you can email me at anj_n@readifmail.com. And I will be very, very happy to help.